Okay. Hello, everyone, and welcome to a lecture that I am so excited to give that I am calling Romancing the Heavens, Some Ways of Connecting with the Fixed Stars. And in some ways, I feel like though I've been prepping this particular lecture in some form for a few months for a lecture that I gave at a campout conference last July called Northstar, and it was amazing. In many ways, I've been preparing this lecture for as long as I've been studying the fixed stars, because what this is a sort of summary or compendium of my fixed star practice, all of the different ways that I connect with these beings, knowing that there's not a lot to work with. So I've kind of had to be creative and make things up and try and experiment and see what does and doesn't work. And hopefully my experimentations and my mistakes can also be useful to you to just getting right to the good stuff. And so that's what I'm going to try to do today is present the stars as in the very broad way that I really relate to them and kind of hopefully help you enter your own amorous relationship with them, because just in general astrology can be to try to be a science or try to be very technical, and while I'm all for intellect and academia and all that good stuff, it's like the stuff that really gets me hits my heart and hits me poetically and makes me feel things. And nowhere else have I found that more strongly than with the fixed stars. And hopefully, as we begin to talk about my practice and how to work with them and dive into Vega in particular, you will also get what I mean on that embodied visceral level. So, just a bit about what the agenda is today, what I see, why we're here, is to present all the ways that I work with the fixed stars and give you some ideas to begin or continue your own stellar practice. We will particularly be going over stargazing, things involving the mind, like research and study, using natal connections to understand the stars, as well as electing or using timing or the chart of the moment to kind of key us into their meaning. We'll get into ritual and gnosis with the stars, embodied activity, as well as talismans and materia. And all of these are useful, and I encourage you to dive into whatever works for you. So a bit about me and my practice and where I'm coming from is, I'm an astrologer and a diviner. That's kind of my primary role right now. But I also started studying astrology living at a Buddhist monastery. Like, it is inextricable from my spiritual practice and a sense of connection to something larger than me. And so what that means is my astrology is also very relational. I see it as a way of working with the universe and higher powers, whatever that means to you. And with that, it's not just about taking, it's about how can I give back? How can I build a relationship? And how can that further inform my own knowledge? And then I'm also a poet and an artist. And so that means that I'm always trying to think outside the box. I'm never just satisfied with what is presented to us as the stellar literature or as this is the way to do things. I want to create something new and see ways of working with the stars that can help us invent and conjure, myriad ways of knowing them. Because part of the reason that I am here talking about the fixed stars so much is because I am not satisfied with what is out there, or only going with, what we've decided is canon. And so I really want to encourage more people to strike out on their own and be maybe a little brave, be a little, go into maybe what feels uncomfortable or scary. Because I tell you, I've been there. I've been working with the fixed stars in particular since 2019, and just spent so much time being like, I don't know where to start. I don't know where I'm going to go or if this is the right way. So I really encourage you to work with that and not see that as a detriment, but okay, there's so much to explore with the stars. And just briefly, this is not really an introductory lecture where I tell you what the stars are or how they work. There's plenty of information out there. I've done plenty of writings and lectures about that. But just really briefly, right, the fixed stars and constellations, right, refer to the celestial points in the sky that appear fixed to a certain point, as opposed to the wandering planets. They are also farther out than the planets. And so there's kind of this sense that they're more keyed into the divine or the spiritual world. I kind of see the planets as operating more as our earthly life, like this is your job and this is your body and this is your family that you have to work within. But the stars really speak to, okay, but this is why you're here, right? And also, these are the beings who are here who have a say in your life and want you to do things that maybe aren't comfortable and convenient, but that are bigger than you. And so with that, I really encourage you to, see what we're doing here is not just dry research and knowledge, but it's building a relationship, hopefully a friendship with the stars. So I'm really inspired by this poet, Joshua Beckman, and he gives this really great lecture where he kind of describes a poetry like friendship. And I think that works really well thinking about building relationships with the stars. He says, at its core, right, friendship is an exposure of unknowing, complex and unanswered. The freedom that is friendship that allows the friend unrestrained to speak and to be heard, not immediately designated or judged, but encountered. Some ecstatic circuit's been joined, and that's how friendship feels. And what I really like about this quote, amongst many things, is that it speaks to, right, real relationship comes with a sense of the unknown, right? The other, whether it be another person or a star, is not fully, known to us, right? Because the second they are, then we stop looking, right? And I really find that with the stars, there's so much to each of them, right? Each of them is kind of like their own city, that if we just worked with what was written or what we decided was the beginning and the end of what the stars mean, then we miss out on not only more knowledge, but a real relationship, one that can continually surprise us. It reminds me of, I've my draft on the fixed stars on a book I'm working on. I finished the draft of that a few months ago, and I wrote about 15 fixed stars. I wrote about the Bohemian fixed stars in depth after studying them and working with them for a year. And, I'd say I know a good amount. I can lecture on probably any of them for a long time. But just a few months ago, I was stargazing and I was working. One of them is Capella, one of the Bohemian stars. And I was, having a moment with them. And I was like, what message do you have for me? What do you want me to know? And basically they said, like, don't forget about the Bohemians. Like, don't think that your knowledge is set or there's not more you can go. And so I want us to have this sort of like, friendship energy with them, if not building actual relationships, but understanding that they can surprise us, right? And also that it's not unilateral. The more energy and kind of humble attention we give to them, the more that they can give to us. One sec. Okay, nothing in the chat. Yeah, so this is just my way of doing it. Also, if this doesn't work for you, then that's also something to note. But I am very much a relational person. And the more I connect with these beings in a reciprocal way, the more that I get out of, the more I get out of them. So to ground this kind of broad lecture, we're going to focus particularly on Vega, who is the primary star in the Lyra or Lyre constellation. But virtually everything we talk about in this lecture can be applicable to any star. So we'll get more and more into her and what her vibe is as the lecture goes on. But yeah, the first place that I would tell anyone to look, and has led me down a lot of really good rabbit holes, is just stargazing. It's so easy to think that astrology just exists on a computer screen, because that's where a lot of astrology exists, and for good reason. But I have started many stellar relationships just going outside when I can see a clear night and noticing, oh, this particular star like keeps poking me. Like, I don't know who it is. I very much recommend getting like a constellational app, identification app, to, if you want to identify a certain star. But even before you know their name, like, you can just look up and there's just one that you keep coming back to. And it sounds weird, but you can learn a lot about the nature of a star just looking at it directly, right? First of all, like, how bright is it? What color is it? How close is it to the ecliptic? What other stars are it near? Is it near, or is it kind of off on its own? But even just like saying hi to it and kind of like trancing out with it, like, I've done that a ton, and it has yielded really interesting results. And it's also really helpful because it'll tell me, oh, this star really wants to work with me. Like the reason I started working with Vega, Vega was one of the first stars that I ever worked with years ago, was because seeing it in the sky, you know, was so loud and prominent, right? If you see Vega out in the summer, that's usually when Vega is visible in the, Western hemisphere, at least in my part of America. Um, she's a very bright star, but there's also something so like regal and graceful about her too. She's imperious, uh, but like you're just drawn to her. There's so much magnetism. I'm just noticing, Honey says, stargazing, how I first connected with Arcturus, who I found to be conjunct my ascendant and ran with my chart ruler. Exactly, right? It's like there's so much synchronicities we open ourselves up to just by like meeting the stars where they are. And as opposed to the planets, which come and go, rise and set, they're going to be variable every day. If it's clear outside, you're going to see stars every day. And so and I love too, going back to Vega for a second. uh Vega is part of this structure in the sky. I don't know, it's not quite a constellation, but it's made up of three stars from three different constellations called the summer triangle. And it's called that because you look out in the summer and you see a triangle. And even just looking at Vega and her position in this with, so Deneb, not Deneb Elgedia, Deneb Adigi is from part of the Swan constellation, and then Altair is part of the Eagle constellation. And just each of their positions speaks to them so well. Like Vega is like this Bohemian star, right? Very well known and powerful throughout all of the stellar literature. She's up top, right? She's closest to the heavens, kind of seeing over everything. Whereas Altair, who's part of the Aquila constellation, is very much about war and aggression and kind of being the pioneer, whereas Deneb Adigi is much more subtle and graceful and mysterious. So she's in the back, kind of, doing her own thing from behind. And so even something as simple as that can teach you so much, which is useful when, though there are plenty of places to go to research, not a lot of them are very good, or a lot of them just kind of regurgitates the same information. So beginning to connect with them with your own eyes and your own body can do a lot to fill it out. And I also find really round out and give depth to what this text tell us, right? There's so many stars that have to do with love and romance. There's so many stars that have to do with protection or money, but in what way? Right? In what form? And it's really in that direct experience that we can really ground that. But I also am always been a research girly, being able to find the really quality sources and gather them together and create new ideas or conclusions from that. I mean, that's what part of my stellar practice for, yeah, as long as I've been working with them as well. And so here is a list of some of my favorite sources. Bernadette Brady is kind of the contemporary reviver of the fixed star practice, particularly with the use of parans. But I find it's like she's a good place to start. But if you really want to go in depth, you kind of have to gather in these other sources, like Constellation of Words, I really like because they compile all of these like ancient opinions and etymologies and histories of the stars. Manilius, in his book of poetry, Astronomica, has some amazing sections, poetic sections on the constellations that I quote all the time. Like I've memorized so much because I'm just like, how are you so good at this? And why is no one else doing what you're doing? Anonymous 379's Treatise on the Bright Stars doesn't get so much into individual stars, but we'll get into stars of a certain planetary nature. So all the Mars and Jupiter stars, they'll give a description of that. And all the Venus and Saturn stars, they'll give a description of that. So I really like that as well. And then anything to do with the lunar stations and the lunar mansions is also about the fixed stars, right? So this is like a lunar calendar system used both in, Islamic astrology as well as Vedic astrology, but they're created by the stars, right? So each mansion has an indicator star that creates that mansion and gives it its flavor. And so I really like the book, I forget the name of it, but Jam Hamadi has a really great book on the lunar stations that I think also speaks to the stars as well. And then, stars are always attached to myths. And so getting into the myths that, created the constellations gives you a lot, as do symbol dictionaries. If you're working with a dolphin star, like what are dolphins about, right? If you're working with a snake star, what are there it is. Procession of the Night Theater is the name of the lunar station book. Thank you, Alberto. And so I like Book of Symbols. I think it's by like the Archetypal Research Society. I think Penguin Dictionary of Symbols is pretty comprehensive, but yeah, it's also like, I trust you, symbol dictionaries just come from observing a certain thing and noticing its tendencies. Like, what do you associate with dolphins? Like, I'm sure you have some good ideas. So I trust yourself with that. And so, yeah, so that is a huge way that I've come to know Vega. And especially as I, definitely feel like my ritual practice took time to develop, it was really nice to have other people's writings and findings to kind of hold on to as I began my own gnosis. So a bit about Vega, if you're not familiar, you can find Vega at 15 degrees Capricorn. That's its current zodiacal position. The myths associated with Vega are anything to do with the divine musician Orpheus. Vega is a Mercury Venus star, which Anonymous 379 describes as learned and erudite, fond of philosophical dissertations, eloquent, creative, perspicacious, ingenious, and clever, keen on music and arts, and good-hearted, right? So if you're familiar with the planets and how the planets work in pairs, a lot of this makes sense, right? Mercury is going to bring in a craftiness and a trickiness, as well as an erudition, and Venus is going to bring in an aesthetics and a romance. And so those two really come together. This is a very, right, as I said, graceful, regal, but, start with some tricks up the sleeves. And then Manilius has this great quote on the lyre constellation on the Orpheus myth, where he says that once with the lyre did Orpheus impart sleep to waves, feeling to rocks, hearing to trees, tears to Pluto, and finally a limit to death. And I mean, I don't know what else I can say about that. Other than that, one of the things that pointed to me to about Vega is that Vega has a role with natural magic, right? Which is just basically harnessing the abilities or powers of rocks and trees and rivers and the things around you found in nature. And then we look into its history, and 10 to 12,000 years ago, Vega was our pole star, right? The star that never rose or set, that was immovable in the night sky each night, and was also associated with the winged goddess from Egypt, Ma'at, who helped move souls from one life to another. So we see that underworld connection also coming forth. And Bernadette Brady, one thing she has to say about Vega is that those who are influenced by it are full of charisma and have been touched by the other world. I also like Austin Coppock describes Vega natives as like romantic poets, right? Kind of walking through the world and finding the enchantment along the way. And so, yeah, there's quite a bit of charisma and magnetism to the star that tends to show forth in the natives. And then a bit more, right, we get into what is the lyre about, right? Lyre and stringed instruments in general were seen to be particularly associated with the movement of the heavens, right? Something divine and transcendent about them, right? A union with cosmic forces. But then, interestingly, for this, extreme celestial association, you would generally use Vega. You would make a Vega talisman, right, to basically ward yourself from demons and wild beasts, right? And that's something that I find a lot with fixed stars, is that they always contain like equal and opposite meanings. It's just figuring out what the duality is there. And this is very much like the highest heights and the most transcendent ideals, and the lowest lows, right, being dragged into like the muck and the underworld and like the messiness of life. And you really see this with the myth of Orpheus as well, who was, the son of a muse, the most famous poet and musician, right, who can enchant anyone with his songs. And then, he was even able to convince Hades to revive his lover, I think, Eurydice. I think she died of a snake bite or something. But he was able to bring her back. But then at the last moment, right, because the whole setup was, okay, you can bring her back, but you can't look behind her. She's going to walk out of the underworld behind you, and you can't look back. And then at the last second, he does, and she loses him. And I mean, that's something for you to consider. Did he make a mistake? Should he have just done what, the heavens asked him to do, and ignored his impulses, his passion and his love? for his, so, for his lover, or, it's, there's a lot to it, right? And the stars tend to bring forward more questions than answers sometimes. Okay, I'm just checking any questions. No. Okay. So, right. So that's how I sort of make my star essays, is I gather all these sources, think about them, come to conclusions. And then I tend to look at what famous people or people that I know have connections to this star. I'll say for myself personally, I have no connections to Vega, but according to my primary directions chart, like all of my stuff is like exactly on Vega, right at 15 degrees Capricorn. So it's like, this is the time for me to just like shout her from the rooftops. You will also always find you have an easier time connecting with stars that you have in your natal chart. You totally can connect with any stars, as I'm hopefully a testament to. But for the one hand, like you already know what they're about because you're already living their story. You might not have the language for it, and you might not quite know how to conceptualize it, but it's there, right? And I've experienced this so much with clients where it's like I'm just telling them something that they already know and then maybe didn't have the words for. Ooh, I have Sun Paran Vega and Square Vega. Ooh, yes. So, right. So Honey is mentioning that they have a natal connection with Vega. So already it's like this is going to kind of feel like a homecoming for them. Venus conjunct Vega. So that's another thing I want to point out too, is like if you have a fixed star or you have a planet conjoined a fixed star and they share in that planet's nature, it's kind of like your planet has a secret boost. So if you have like Mercury or Venus conjoined Vega, like Vivian does, then I don't know, it's not like your planet is then suddenly dignified, but it's got some gifts and tricks that you wouldn't normally expect it to. So I think that that's really cool. And then, yeah, similarly, right? So I have the chart of Stevie Nicks up here. She has the moon on Vega, pretty much almost exactly culminating. And I don't know, I don't think I have to explain why I think Stevie Nicks embodies like the enchanted underworld mystical artist music archetype, but like she does. Like if you want to understand like Vega viscerally, like just listen to Leather and Lace, and I find particularly that artists, like their work will explain a star to me like so well. There's something about like art and stories and telling things through myths that like our brains just understand so much more than keywords. It's cool. Someone says, what is a primary directions chart? I'm not going to get super into it. It's like another form of like timing, like artificial timing. Like it's not like it creates a chart for a real moment. I think, well, no, I'm not exactly sure, but basically every year that you're born, every planet in your chart is moved forward a degree, right? So if you have your sun at 15 degrees of a sign, when you're 30, you'll have your sun at 15 degrees of the next sign. I'm not a super expert. My colleague, Brea Ione is very much into this, but I can't tell you more other than like everything in my primary directions chart. So yes, exactly as Annika said, similar to progressions. This is like the primary before the secondary, but very much follows a similar logic, but I'm not going to get too into the weeds about that. I would also recommend like look what fixed stars you have conjoined significant points in your solar return chart, right? That can be another way of working with like, oh, what beings want to work with me this year, especially if you also have that star in your natal chart. But just some questions to ask you to kind of like get on the level of like the stars in your natal chart are like, who have you always been, right? Regardless of the influence of everything else, what are the tendencies that you're like, where did those come from? Right? How do your differing interests all serve a similar purpose, right? Beyond like the actual, like, what do you do? Think about like, why do you do it? What like core meaning or desire is at the core of that impulse? And then what is most effortless, right? The stars in my mind convey certain gifts and powers, and they come with trials and struggles to hone those gifts, but they show us the boons and the help that we get to live these big journeys that I think we all have the potential for. And then another way I really like working with the stars, and this is something that I do whenever I'm really concentrating on a star, I want to make sure that they're like by the phone, so to speak. And whereas the planets, for example, right, we have an opportunity to encounter them pretty much every day if you're using planetary hours or planetary days. With the fixed stars, they're just so remote. They really need a planet like aspecting them in order to like be drawn down. And so generally, you would use the moon to do that because the moon is the translator of celestial light and makes astral powers manifest on the earthly plane. And so when the moon is forming a harmonious aspect to the star's zodiacal degree, that is a great time to perform a ritual or an action or just, use that time to, be like, oh, that's Vega time. What happens during that time? And what would that teach me about the star? So here I have a list of the zodiacal degrees of the Bohemian stars. Just to give you an example, I also have a free fixed star indexed. If you haven't seen that already, that gives you the zodiacal degrees of like 67 stars. But with Vega, for example, right, I would reach out to her when the moon is at about 15 degrees of Capricorn, Virgo, Taurus, Scorpio, or Pisces, right? So whenever the moon is conjoined the zodiacal degree or sextiling or trining it. Yeah, I think that about explains it. I'll see if there's any questions. And for this, I really like using an app like Time Nomad or having like a chart of the moment app is really work. What about working with the star at its heliacal rise? Yes, great question. So that is also a great time to work with the star. I was actually having a conversation with a friend about this of like, okay, but what about a heliacal rise that happens but you're like near mountains and you can't actually see the stars at heliacally rises and it might be a week until you see it. So I think it's one of those areas where like I want to encourage you to explore, but it might have to be involving some experimentation of like, is it the actual day that it heliacally rises or do you actually have to see it on, above the horizon for it to be real. But with heliacal rise, you don't have to do the same electing because it's working on a very different scale than like, the natal chart. And for that, unfortunately, there's also the barrier of there's not many sources that tell you the exact heliacal rise for the stars in your location. I think Bernadette Brady's software does, but if you don't have a PC, it's kind of very annoying to download her software. So I'm not going to get too into that. And so I mentioned having Time Nomad, like a chart of the moment app, because another way that I learned about the stars is, oh, I had a moment that feels meaningful, right? Or feels like there's like an omen or something there for me to look into. So I'll look at the chart of the moment and see, oh, is there a fixed star conjoined an angle particularly? So that is like the ascendant, the midheaven, the descendant, or the IC. And that is generally a sign that, okay, this star is present or is trying to reach out or is poking me. I had this happen recently when I was on a road trip at Joshua Tree. I was making an Ocotillo essence and it just felt so potent and magical. And at one point, this plant even pricked me on the finger and made me bleed. And I was like, okay, there's something happening here. And so, of course, I looked for the chart of the moment and Regulus was rising. And Regulus loves the desert, right? He's known as a choleric sign. He has to do with like war and bloodshed. And so everything was just telling me like, okay, Regulus wants to work with me and very much did and very much was life-changing. Let's see. Stellarium. Great. So Issa says Stellarium tells you the heliacal rise. So I guess I need to get on that. I am not the best at software. I'm pretty Luddite in that way. But it shows the heliacal rise for location. Great to know. So Annika asked, did you time this lecture to a star or Vega specifically? So yeah, I ultimately did kind of time it to Vega, mostly in the sense that the moon is in Taurus, like approaching a trine with Vega. But that wasn't, my only electional consideration. So it's one of those things where like, is that kind of, a wide orb, from 15 degrees Capricorn? Yeah, probably. But I'm curious to see if it still works, right? Because I think of Warnock, Christopher Warnock makes a ton of fixed star talismans. And if you look at some of his elections, right, the moon is pretty far off from the star, even if it's approaching. So that answers your question. Okay, so from there, this is what I really feel like is the way to go beyond the limited fixed star literature or to round it out, and that is to enter into rituals with the star. This is something that I kind of came to this conclusion pretty early on that I would have to commune with them directly and figure out a way to do that if I wanted to be able to like ethically give people fixed star readings. It's like I can't just regurgitate Bernadette Brady at people and like expect them to like pay me money. So yeah, I spent a lot of time just like experimenting, timing them according to the moon, just like setting out a basic ritual, meditating and seeing what came up. So the main thing with setting up a ritual is to just be consistent and to figure out what works best for you. There's something particularly about like having certain actions or certain objects we associate with meeting the fixed stars, which can kind of get us into the mode of, okay, I'm ready to commune. I'm setting up a space for a specific particular thing. My basic setup, and that's the thing, is my setup is very basic because if it's not, then I won't do it. Is I have like a little altar table. I set up just a basic altar cloth. I light a candle and some incense. I'll usually leave like a water offering. I find that the stars are not as interested in food as the planets are, so experiment with that. And then if I have corresponding objects around, then I'll also put them on the altar. So for Vega, for example, I really associate Vega with labradorite. And so I'll often put labradorite on or musical instruments, or, I'll play the harp for Vega, of course. And then I invoke the star, which is pretty, once again, very loose. There's not, Orphic hymns to individual stars. So I kind of just like off the dome invoke what I know of their nature and, please, show me your, I say my intention, show me your nature, and I will share it with others and, whatever feels right. That's another thing too, is like, don't be afraid to talk to them like a human and be like, hi, I'm just figuring this out. Like, hopefully you're there. Like, they might not understand it, but they're not going to be mad at you about that. And then like, this is really where like my meditation practice comes in. You just kind of have to sit and wait. Especially, if you're new to visioning or meditation or gathering information in this way, like our whole society is set up where that form of knowing is degraded or dismissed. So there's so many voices saying that this isn't real or you're not good at this, right? Especially because we have this idea of like psychic powers being like only given to the few rather than like a skill that I think everyone can cultivate. It's just about finding how does spirit move through you. And then just, yeah, being open to whatever comes up. I generally find like if I'm doubting whatever comes up, like if an image is persistent, like I try to shoo it away and it keeps coming back, that's usually a sign that there's something to it. It's not just my mind conjuring things. And then also if I'm sitting with a star and I have a very specific idea of what it is, and then something totally unrelated keeps coming up, that to me is also like, oh, like I'm not just making this up, right? There's this leap of faith that this star is sort of bringing out of me to trust this new information. Um, let's see. I love creating Honey's saying, I love creating intuitive art or taking 1 to 2 days to invite or receive intuitive keys about a starred spirit. Exactly. Like that's, a huge part of my practice and a huge thing of what I encourage you is just like make yourself like a radio transmitter, like as much as possible, like being willing to be surprised. Like it's the same thing for me with like art and ideas and inspiration. If I set an intention, and it, and I make myself open, then the universe can surprise me. And it is like that sort of, yeah, it is that sort of insight that I feel like the fixed stars just want us to have so bad. And the messages of the stars can come forth in a lot of different ways. Like I tend to be very visual, so I get a lot of images. Maybe you'll get sounds, or words, certain feelings or memories. I notice if there's any weird things that happen during the ritual. Like I forget which star it was, but for one, I was holding a candle and I got spilled a bunch of wax on my hand. So I was like, okay, that that's something. Or getting, I at the end of the ritual, I check my phone and I get a text from a friend who I hadn't heard from in a while. Or of course, when I was working with the crow star, a crow was cawing outside my window for 10 minutes. So, right. I really, really encourage you to just take notes on whatever comes through, like no judgment. When I was first being really serious about my ritual gnosis practice, I did that a ton. I was like, I don't think any of this is useful. I think all of this is dumb. I'm probably not good at this, but I'm just going to record it, right, for later. And then I can pick through it. And then I came back to it a few months later and I was like, oh no, there's something here, right? So just knowing that this is probably like a new way of like approaching the stars, approaching knowledge, and just be as non-judgmental as possible. You can also use divination tools to, learn more about a star, like in the ritual space, like draw a card, asking what is your nature, or like cast an I Ching being like, what is this, what do you want to do with me? How do you want me to work with you? So, right, there's many different ways to gather information from this space, and just, follow what feels easiest to you. Isa is saying that I'm UK based, so it's night here and I can see Vega from my window right now. That's amazing. That feels like an omen, I will say. Yeah, and I'm so glad to see people are realizing their connection with Vega. That should make visioning with her all the more easier. That's something else I really want to say too, is that when I start ritual relationships with stars that I have natal connections to, like it's like I'm in their realm so much quicker. Like it's like they're really waiting for me to kind of get off my ass and finally say hi. And it, like especially like omen practice, like Antares is my heliacal rising star, and one of the first times I reached out to them, I got so many omens. They immediately visited me in a dream, and it was kind of scary. But I'm like, okay, you really, really, you get it. Okay, we're in this together, whether I want to believe it or not. So yeah, Alberto is also mentioning another great fixed star resource is Diana Rosenberg's 2-book set. I agree. I love it. The only problem is that it's $100 on eBay and they're really bad at sending you the books. So that's not to scare you off, but I'll say I only received volume 1. But yes, but it's a great book. It's a great book, especially when there's so few comprehensive fixed star books. Definitely check that out. And I'll say I also have a newsletter that lists all of my favorite fixed star resources, and Diana Rosenberg is a part of that as well. Okay, so the next step is kind of related to ritual. It's just another way of seeing our whole lives as ritual instead of having to sit at a specific space and meditate with the star. I really like the idea that there are specific actions we can take that if we're present and sort of drawing a star in, we can learn about the star's nature. And yeah, in some ways they can draw us down and not draw us down. In some ways, by inviting a star to do a certain action with you, they can do their magic and help assist you with that. So with Vega, for example, some things that I associate as Vega things, and I'll often invite Vega to do with me, is any sort of creativity or music, particularly, any stringed instrument. As I said, I am a harpist, and working with Vega while just doing, lighting a candle for her and saying a little prayer for her before I sit down has just completely transformed my creative practice. Another interesting Vega thing, and this comes from shared gnosis with another Vega practitioner friend, is that tackling a big thorny project is something that Vega really likes to help you with, especially if you're someone who's like struggled a lot in life. Like Vega will make things easier for you. Like with this friend, she really feels like Vega was like an instrumental part of her like finishing her grad program and getting certified to be a translator and then like beginning her career. So there's something too, it just relates to like wild beasts or kind of big demonic forces. Like Vega kind of helps you break down the big thorny things and like move through them as gracefully and as skillfully as possible. And so that's another thing, is if you have a big thorny project, like invite Vega to help you with that, right? And in addition to like learning about her nature through that project and practicing natural magic, right? Like spending time with the stones and the plants around you, or using them to as blessings, or drawing on their resources, like, hey, I want help with protection, like, rock, can you help me out with that? Like, that's very much a Vega thing, finding the right, the unseen, magic and tendrils of the natural world. And that's why I also see like vibes, and like reading the vibes is a very Vega thing. Like, one of my friends has Vega conjoined his lot of fortune, and he's one of the people who came up with like the term a few years ago for like the vibe shift, like the big cultural vibe shift. So like, being able to go into a space and be like, this is a good space, or, oh, there's something rancid happening there, like that feels like a Vega activity. Or you can ask Vega to like, hey, can you help me like figure out these people's intentions, or like, are these someone who I can really bond with, or is this someone who like maybe doesn't have my best interests at heart? Right, all of it is just speaking to like a subtle, sort of intuitive, unseen way of knowing. And then another way I really love working with Vega is kind of like a romantic poet on the moors, just taking an enchanted, open-ended walk with them. I did that a few weeks ago because I'm trying to incubate like an idea for a big creative project. And I was, in this park in town. There were so many cars parked in the parking lot, but I saw almost no one on the walk. Beautiful weather. And then as I'm walking out, there's a man a few steps in front of me, and he just stops and stares. And so when I got to that spot, I stop and stare, and I'm making direct eye contact with a coyote who just does not move. We have like a moment for like 20 seconds. And then I keep walking, and there are two doe in front of my path, and I'm able to move slowly and subtly enough that they just walk by at their own pace, and they're not scared off. And I don't quite know what those symbols mean, but to me, having that happen and just feeling that sense of enchantment through this walk was like, okay, Vega is there and they're listening, and I just need to keep incubating this idea with them. Sophie says, this Vega tip of working on authority project is so helpful. Thank you. I'm so glad to hear that. And once again, this is not like that idea about Vega, you're not going to find in a book. Like, this is something that my friend and I kind of came to together through like our own relationship with the star and discussing it. And that's something else I want to emphasize for a moment too. You might have heard the phrase like unverified personal gnosis, which is basically what I'm trying to help you facilitate for yourself. And at this, as much as I'm like, trust yourself and be open to things, like, you also have to take some of these with a grain of salt. Right? You might get some things that have nothing to do with the star, or that are interference or something. And that's why like having spiritual friends or other people you can discuss these findings with is so important. Like, obviously it's easier said than done, but if you can find other people who you can share your ideas and your insights with, like, that is really how this field has expanded. And so having other friends and people who work with the stars to compare and contrast notes with has been like so fundamental to my practice. So maybe that's something you can ask Vega for, is like, help me find the other magical weirdos. And so finally, and this is kind of the primary way that fixed stars are talked about in a lot of texts, is working with them via talismans and materia. So I mentioned the Bohemian stars, this group of 15 fixed stars that are sort of highlighted the most throughout stellar literature for thousands of years. And the way that they come down to us is in talismanic and talismanic magical texts, basically telling you how to make a stone talisman with certain powers, drawing from the energy of the star. So it kind of takes, I showed you basic elections with the moon, with the stars. These take it to a whole nother level, right? I'm not an electional astrology person. I'm very intermediate, probably beginner at it. So, talk to a more skilled electional magician who could speak to when you would make a talisman. But basically the sequence is, on that elected time, you create a ritual with the star, you carve a certain symbol into the stone, and then you fumigate it with a certain incense. So, and this is how Vega has been primarily passed down to us, is through this text, Hermes on the Bright Stars. This is one of the variations of the same text, but it says that savory juice with an equal amount of an herb called fumitory and with a little of a stone called toronzo. I don't know what that is. I know peridot as the Vega stone, right? If you suffumigate this stone with those herbs, it will grant favor with beasts, protect from scabies, that is against demons, nocturnal phantoms, and fears. And then, you also have work from people like Sphere and Sundry, where you have magical oils and lotions and tinctures. You have paper talismans. Something else I like doing with the stars a lot is making flower essences or herbal preparations on elected time. And I'll get into an example of that. But here's what I have to say about talismans. Do I like talismans? Yes, I do. I'm wearing talismans right now. I don't like talismans as like this be all end all for working with a planet or a star if it's not supplemented with ritual relationship. Like if I'm treating my talismans like a vending machine where I'm like, okay, like Venus, do your Venus thing, and I'm not like making offerings to her, or I'm not like checking in with her, like I don't think Venus is gonna smite me, but I think there's going to be a limit to how much benefit I can get out of it. So when I'm thinking about like the magic, if with the fixed stars, which is to me particularly not me just communing and learning about them, but me wanting them to help me and like help my life. When I'm using the fixed stars in that way, like I get so much more results like with regular ritual and attention than I do like buying a $500 talisman, which is like so much respect to people who can create them and elect them and ensoul them. This is just my soapbox, so I'm using it. Similarly, like a paper talisman is also another way to if you're not, if you don't want to get into like all of the nitty gritty of electing, right? When the moon conjoins the star and you're doing a ritual, like try making a little paper talisman and seeing what that could do for you. But I think first and foremost, showing up and offering something to the stars goes so far, especially if you come to them with love and reverence and openness and humility. So yeah, one of the ways that I have worked with Vega was I made a flower essence on an elected date that a friend had chosen, and she actually made stone talismans with them. But that just didn't feel right to me. So what I decided to do was about 20 minutes before the election. And I don't know if you can see, let me see if I can, but you'll see that my friend experimented. So the moon is squaring Vega, which normally wouldn't make sense for an election, but Venus, right, one of the planets of Vega, is on top of her. And so this is a way of, experimenting with maybe a planet can also draw a fixed star down. So basically 20 minutes before Venus and Vega rose, I went on a walk around my neighborhood and wanted to see if there were any flowers that wanted to work with me, which was kind of a hard task in the middle of November. But just it's like out of nowhere, after like 5-10 minutes of walking, I see this beautiful like lush camellia bush. And if you've never encountered them, they're these big giant pink many petaled flowers. And I did divination and it was clear, okay, this plant wants to work with me. And so I made this essence right during this electional time to try to draw Vega in. And actually, at some point, after being there for like 20-30 minutes, a hummingbird comes by and drinks from the flower. So the hummingbird is also part of this essence. And so it just, on one hand, it's like Vega was showing me like her extreme like gracefulness and lightness and beauty. But then by the time I get home, I realize that like I have stepped in dog poop. Like my shoe is covered in it. And I pride myself on someone who like through luck or fate never steps in dog poop. So it felt like Vega being like, okay, yeah, you think I'm all like light and nice, but like don't forget about the dirt and the muck. And I, when I was giving this lecture and talking about this, the flower essence in July, someone pointed out too that like camellia are like very messy. Like they create a lot of like floral mess, like the whole big flowers just like pop up and just become like this ring of like pink and brown muck around the bush. And so everything about it just like allowed me to experience directly for myself what Vega is about and what what her flavor, what her vibe is. And so now I take this essence, like whenever I create music, and it's part of my ritual where I call Vega in, and it's done so much for me to like understand like creativity as like this underworld journey where you're like making it and remaking it, and you're not in charge of it. It's about you kind of having faith and following the vibes. Someone said, I often wonder if stars have a sense of humor. They do. They do. You might not always find it funny in the moment, but they do. Oh, wow. So Sophie says that I bought 2 camellia plants during the 22nd lunar station, which is Vega's lunar station. So I want to say, like, this is how correspondences are formed, right? So part of the reason that I focus so much on the Bohemians on my book is because we already have plant and gem correspondences for them. But like every star has plants and gems that are sympathetic to them. And just because there's some plants listed for Vega doesn't mean that's all of them. And so, yeah, maybe camellia and working with camellia is like another way of working with Vega. But right, that's another thing I love about ritual and gnosis is you can make these new connections. I like this. Honey says, makes me think of the transformation process. I said, Vega could walk with one through difficult growth. I think that's a pretty good idea to sit with and to practice with, right? And like that, like, yeah, these are the exact sorts of like thoughts that I want you to experiment with, and that I'm trying to, yeah, help you discover for yourself. So, in summary, hopefully y'all can see this. Follow what feels best for you. And I truly mean that. If it doesn't feel good or it doesn't feel right, you're not going to do it. And also, like, way more than you think. Like I feel like that could be the real summary of this is like I'm trying to help people trust their way and what they know, and also like play with what you don't know is not a hindrance, but an opportunity, a place to go beyond what has been established. And then, yeah, I mean, focusing on one star at a time is probably a good idea. I say this as someone who doesn't take that advice and like loves to stuff as many marshmallows in my mouth as possible. But at the very least, like starting with, one that you can comfortably visit a couple times a month or on a regular basis. Like since the beginning of the year, every month when the moon conjoins the fixed star Alphecca, like I'll perform a certain ritual and I'll go out with her. Like, and that, even just that monthly check-in is done a ton to like build our relationship. Try different methods and see what works, right? Each have their merits. As much as I'm pro like ritual and gnosis and being the woo kings and queens that you are, like as I said, I'm also a research girly, and I think grounding these things in something material and something real is also really important. But I also, yeah, I want this to feel expansive. Like my kind of goal is to, in my life in general, is to see as many of the things I do as creating magic or as rituals. And one of the ways that I like to do that is to just figure out like, how are these sympathetic to the stars? How can I invite the stars in? So yeah, that's what I have to say about that. And then practice, right? Like it took me a long time to feel like I could research and write about the stars. It took me a long time to feel confident, like having a ritual gnosis practice that I, would use to inform my opinions of the stars. And yeah, there will never be an end of the ways to know or relate to them. Like this is if you're a star person, you're a star person for life. The second we think that we know everything, right? We miss out on so much, right? One of my favorite, Zen quotes come from Shinryu Suzuki. In the beginner's mind are many possibilities. In the expert minds, there is very few. And hopefully this gives you many different possibilities and avenues and fun rabbit holes. I want this to be fun. I'm a fifth house person. I want the things that I do with my spiritual practice to bring me delights. And then, of course, I have my fixed star essay collections to kind of give you that scaffolding and to kind of gather a gathering of all of my information on the stars, all of the research that I find useful, and the rabbit holes are kind of put together in these really long essays. And I released my first one that contains over a dozen fixed stars in depth last November, and my next one will be coming out next week on the 20th. And so thank you all for coming on this journey with me. I will leave the space open for questions. Any and all fixed star questions, I will be happy to answer about anything that we shared here. When that is over, I will transition this to the second part of this lecture, which is totally optional. You can leave if you don't want to, but I will lead you through a guided meditation with Vega to give you some idea of what that looks like. And then if y'all are interested in that, we can stick around and discuss what we saw and found with Vega. So yeah, I'll see if there's any questions. Thank you. Honey recommends the XA collections. That's very sweet of you. Yeah, thank you. Thanks, everyone. Guess no questions, but I will stick around for them. Okay. Isa asks, as someone woefully lacking in star conjunctions to my planets, AC and MC, I was wondering if you pay attention with other aspects to stars in your chart, like trines or sextiles. Would having a star squaring or opposing your natal chart be more difficult to work with? Can I still find a relationship with them? So first of all, I would recommend you looking into your parans. If you haven't already, this is another way of measuring stellar relationship. That the idea behind it is to, stars in the natal chart are not in their exact position, right? Because everything in the natal chart is on the ecliptic, right? This tiny narrow band where all the planets are. But some of the fixed stars are up here or down here. Or so parans are just a way of measuring planetary stellar relationships. It's pretty complicated. I spent many months figuring out how to explain them for a lecture, but you can find them very easily. Not that easily, actually, but astro.com allows you to see your parans. And on my fixed star index has instructions for how to download your parans. So those are many other stellar relationships. I personally don't look at any other aspects between the fixed stars because, as opposed to the planets, like where all of them are relevant for everyone, the fixed stars are just so remote and far away that they really have to be like very keyed in, like in a very tight orb to our chart to really impact them. But then once again, maybe you spend time with and research and work with stars that you have aspects to, and you find that there's something there, right? So it's one of those things where I haven't looked, and I don't personally, that's not my wheelhouse right now. So I encourage you to look for yourself. But similarly, like the majority of the stars that I have like very strong relationships to right now, I don't have any natal connection to, right? I don't have any natal connection to Alphecca, and I work with them every month. I don't have any natal connection to Sirius, and I feel very profound with that. Regulus, who reached out to me, I have no natal connection with as well. So think of the natal connection as more like, oh, the stars that are connected to my chart are like a part of my story, whether I like it or not. The stars that are not, you can opt into or not. And they, like, once again, that might take more time for them to like reach out to you, but I don't find them any less generous. Let's see. Thank you. Let's see. Are there instances in which you would advise against working with stars/stars to avoid? Like if someone has a natal configuration in which a star is conjunct a malefic, can one still try to commune, relate, or work with these stars? Great question. So one thing I'll say is that as opposed to like working with the planetary malefics like Mars and Saturn, even if a star is malefic or seen as negative, like I find that there's much fewer side effects or like potential downsides. Like I tried to work with my malefic out of sect. I did it for one day and I spilled a gallon of gasoline in the back of my trunk and had to get the fire department called on me on the highway. Like I have not experienced anything close to that annoying and bad working with the fixed stars. And I've worked with Algol. Like, so Algol is the only star that I kind of put an asterisk in of like, like especially respectful to her. So Algol is the head of Medusa. For those who don't know, she's kind of considered the most malefic star in the sky. And you just more have to see her as like, treat her like a person, be soft with her and know that she's wounded, and maybe don't ask her for things like right off the bat. But there's plenty of like malefic stars that I don't have direct experience with. So I can't guarantee like, oh, nothing bad will happen. But I think a lot of it just comes down to attitude and also understanding that like even the malefic stars, like they're coming to us from a much like bigger and global level. We're like in the sense of not like they're not giving you pain that is senseless. Like the pain that they give you is like the like what you need to become like what they want you to be. And I find that like working with the star ritually is like much less finicky than like living with the star. Like people who have like if anything, Sirius at times can be malefic natally because it's a star of like extreme heights and extreme shadows and scorching heat and raving dogs. So I've heard of Sirius natives, like having Sirius bring them difficult things. But working with Sirius, I have not found messes up my life. Like if anything, it brings forth pains and sacrifices I need to make. So I think to kind of summarize all of my ramblings, I would say generally like I wouldn't worry, but also trust your experience. And if you work with like a more malefic star and it doesn't feel good, then just like back off, right? Like just trust yourself. And if anything, one of the things I love about the stars is that if someone has like a natal star conjunct a malefic, I will tell them to work with that star over the malefic because something about that star's energy is just going to be more stable and less ouchy. So that's what I have to say about that. Okay, so how do you narrow down where to start when it all seems so loud? I've been pulled deep into the stars since I got back looking at them through the astrology. While there are ones that have called, it's hard to know when the star madness kind of sinks in. Yeah, I think I'm curious, but with the star madness, there can definitely be like this overwhelm or this sort of like getting high on your own supply kind of vibe. But I think it's just a matter of starting and like playing and experimenting. If there's one, yeah, like I'm trying to think of like how do I decide what star to work with at a given moment, and it feels kind of arbitrary. I'm just like I'll start with this one and see how that goes and see, spend enough time with that. But that's kind of why I recommend just like find one in particular that you really focus on. Another way I like to kind of narrow it down to is I'll pay attention. If I want to look at like natal connections, I'll pay attention to what timing is coming up for me this year. Am I in a Venus year? Right? Oh, like is there a Venus star I really want to work with? Or is there, a star in, connected to my Venus that I really want to work with? Or just ask yourself, like, do you want love? Do you want more resources? Do you want to find your purpose? And then find a star that of the stars you want, that are calling to you, is there one that fits, your current desires? Then that's a pretty good place to start. But yeah, that's kind of the problem with the stars is there's so many and it's so easy to want to jump around, but it is really in like committed relationship with them that you really begin to see them and also benefit from them. Okay. Someone is asking, they're looking into their parans and they notice they don't have as many stars in my natal chart as others. What does it mean if you have more or less? So I don't see it as like a value judgment having more or less, or like, oh, you're more elevated, because you have more than someone else. Like, I think it's just you have fewer stars who are like involved in your stuff, and thus you can kind of focus on like a smaller handful. But I mean, it doesn't really mean a ton. It's a lot of it's just like your location and where you are, and the timing of your birth was such that there weren't as many stars making planetary connections as another time. But yeah, I don't really see a difference in people who have more or less. Okay. Conjunctions in the parans are the main aspects used for fixed stars. Yes. And that's at least how I do it. And I think that's how most other fixed star practitioners also work with the stars. Let's see. If you have a star conjunct Mars or Saturn, should one be cautious of that? So I think you like this is something I go back and forth on because I mentioned this fixed star Capella that I have a really strong relationship to, and Capellas conjoin my Mars, or not conjoined in paran to my Mars. And I have not had any negative impacts working with Capella. Or Deneb Al-Gedi is another fixed star that I really love. Deneb Al-Gedi is in paran and conjoined my Saturn, who's my malefic out of sect. And Deneb Al-Gedi has only brought me good things. So once again, this is my experience. I also there can also be this thing of like when a star is conjoined to malefic, it's going to kind of come forward more, right, in that malefic way, or it's going to come through like through the prism of Mars. But once again, and I can only speak to my experience, I have not found working with like these like malefically attached stars to then bring in more malefic energy. But you might find that too. So if you feel a caution, then note that. But I have yet to have my life messed up from these stars. Okay. Honey says, I have Fomalhaut conjoined Moon and Saturn, and Skiat and Markab both conjoined Mars. And so far, it's only found support in lessons, like learning caution from the story of another. Yes. Great. So, Honey also, for what it's worth, has this experience as well. But I always say one of my favorite quotes is if the bird and the book disagree, always believe the bird. If you start working with the star conjoined your Mars and it messes up your life, then you can say fuck that. Okay. Yeah, star madness is me describing the intensity and obsession that sets in for me when I get drawn down into the rabbit hole. Yeah. Yeah, I get that. And that's kind of also why I like ritual practice is because it forces me to slow down. It forces me to go at the speed of the relationship with the star and take my time and also realize that like as much as hungry as I am to know everything now, I can't possibly know everything now. Like I have to slow down to really let it all sink in, which is, yeah, like I said, I'm not perfect at this. I encounter star madness more times than I'd like to admit. Oh, I like this advice from Honey that I let myself wander from star to star and then see who comes back up naturally most consistently over time, and then start building more deeply with them. Right. So this is just another way of saying like just notice your life and notice like maybe like have a night where you like light a candle, have a little ritual. You say these are the stars I'm thinking about. If one of you wants to work with me, come forward, right? And then, hey, say maybe you have a weird synchronicity during the day and you notice, oh, that star is conjoined the midheaven or something. That could be a good sign. I also really like using divination for that. Like if I have like a group of stars that I'm considering, I'll pull a tarot card for each and I'll see what that tells me about working with them at that very moment. I do that a lot, actually. So Isa says, I like this, where they said, yeah, stargazing helps. They're a very visual person. So I find that working with the star, I can actually see at the time really helps. And so their star relationships follow a seasonal pattern. This is another way of kind of counteracting the sort of stellar madness as well. And that's another thing. If you want to take your ritual to the next level, do it when you can see the star in the sky. Like that is chef's kiss to me. Okay, yes. The Virgo Mercury, Virgo Moon. So I also understand the Virgo struggle. um yes. Yeah. Let's take the Pisces Mercury advice. Might sound wild, but let yourself have less rules around how you anticipate info to flow in and see what comes. Exactly. I think that's exactly it. There's yeah, I feel like a lot of my practice has just been attuning to when they're there, being able to notice when they're already there or they're already acting through me. Any other questions from anyone else before we transition? People, some time. I'll drink some water. Okay. Going to stop this recording. Sec. Okay. Okay. If great, you're so welcome. Let me stop this recording.